The Horizon's edge dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Nexus Prime system. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge, looking at the massive space station that orbited the galactic capital world. The structure was bigger than anything humanity had ever built. It stretched for hundreds of kilometers in every direction, covered in lights that pulsed with alien energy. "Well, boss, we're definitely not in Kansas anymore," said Ben Rodriguez, Jake's tactical officer. The young man had served in 3 different alien conflict zones and spoke 4 galactic languages fluently. His dark eyes were wide as he stared at the station. "That thing makes our biggest space dock look like a toy," added Kate Sullivan, the team's engineer. She was short and stocky, with red hair that never seemed to stay neat despite military regulations. Her fingers were already dancing over her tablet, analyzing the station's construction. Ryan Mitchell, their communications specialist, was busy at his console trying to make contact with station control. He was tall and thin, with pale skin that showed he spent most of his time indoors working with computers and communication systems. "Nexus Prime Control is responding," Ryan said. "They're directing us to Docking Bay 779. They sound about as excited to see us as we expected." Jake nodded. He had prepared his team for the reception they would likely receive. Humanity was still the newest member of the galactic community, and most alien species treated humans like children who had somehow learned to fly spaceships. The docking process took 2 hours. Alien traffic control systems were designed for ships much larger and more advanced than the Horizon's edge. Jake's pilot had to make 3 attempts before successfully connecting to the station's docking clamps. As soon as the airlock opened, the differences became obvious. The station's corridors were built for beings much taller than humans. The ceiling was at least 4 meters high, and the walls were covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. The air had a metallic taste that made breathing uncomfortable. A reception committee was waiting for them. Jake recognized the species from his briefing materials, but seeing them in person was still shocking. War champion Grixtel of the Korthak Empire stood 3 meters tall. His body was covered in natural armor plates that looked like black metal. 4 arms extended from his torso, each ending in hands with razor-sharp claws. His face had no mouth that Jake could see, just a collection of breathing holes below eyes that glowed red in the dim light. "So these are the humans," Grixtal said through a translation device. His voice sounded like grinding metal. "I expected them to be larger. How did such small creatures develop space travel?" Next to him stood a figure that barely seemed solid. The Nexari representative was called Mind Core Unit 7749, and it looked like a collection of floating geometric shapes held together by energy fields. When it spoke, the words appeared directly in Jake's mind rather than being heard through his ears. "Biological forms are inefficient," the Nexari said. "These humans show particularly poor optimization. Their brains process information at less than 1% of acceptable speeds." The third member of the reception committee was more disturbing than the others. Seer Meneth of the Ethereal Dominion appeared to be female, but her skin was completely transparent. Jake could see her internal organs pulsing with soft light. Her large eyes seemed to look through him rather than at him. "I see many possible futures for these humans," Meneth said in a voice like singing crystal. "In most of them they fail quickly and completely. In a few, they provide mild entertainment before their inevitable defeat." Jake forced himself to smile and stepped forward. "Thank you all for the warm welcome. I'm Commander Jake Morrison, representing Earth and the Human Defense Forces." Grixtal made a sound that might have been laughter. "Defense Forces? How amusing. What do humans need to defend against? Your species has never fought a real war. That's not exactly true, Ben said quietly, but Jake raised a hand to stop him from saying more. We're here to participate in the Extinction Protocol simulation, Jake said. We understand it's quite a challenge. Challenge, repeated Mind Core Unit 7749. The probability of human success is so low that our computational systems register it as effectively 0. Your participation serves no logical purpose. Maybe we just want to learn something, Kate said. Her engineering background made her practical about most things, but Jake could see she was getting annoyed with the alien's attitude. Seer Myneth tilted her head, studying Kate with those unsettling, transparent eyes. Learning requires the ability to understand what you observe. Humans lack the mental capacity to comprehend the true nature of this simulation. We'll see about that, Ryan muttered under his breath. The group was led through the station's corridors toward the simulation center. Other species were arriving as well, and Jake got his first look at the full scope of their competition. Delegations from 12 different civilizations filled the hallways. Some walked on legs, others floated, and a few seemed to phase in and out of visible reality. All of them stared at the humans with expressions that Jake interpreted as amusement, contempt, or pity. Look at their primitive equipment, one alien said to another in a language Ryan's translator could barely handle. I heard they still use chemical rockets for some of their ships, came the reply. How did the assembly even allow them to participate? This is supposed to be for real civilizations. Jake kept walking and tried not to let the comments bother him. He had expected this reaction. What surprised him was how consistent it was. Every single alien species seemed to view humanity the same way. The simulation center was a vast spherical chamber in the heart of the station. Thousands of holographic displays floated in the air, showing star maps, fleet positions, and tactical data. At the center of the room stood an ancient artificial intelligence called the Archive. It looked like a pillar of pure light that pulsed with different colors as it processed information. Welcome, participants, to the Extinction Protocol simulation, the Archive said in a voice that somehow spoke every language at once. You are here to face the greatest threat the galaxy has ever known. The Devourers represent complete annihilation of all intelligent life. Your task is to prevent this extinction. The Archive began explaining the rules. Each team would control the resources of multiple star systems. They would command fleets, manage populations, and direct research efforts. The simulation would run in accelerated time, compressing decades of conflict into days of real time. The Devourers adapt to any strategy used against them, the Archive continued. They learn from each encounter and become more effective. Traditional, military approaches have proven insufficient. No team has ever successfully prevented galactic extinction in the 200-year history of this simulation. What exactly are these Devourers? Jake asked. The other teams turned to stare at him. Apparently, asking questions during the briefing was not normal protocol. The Devourers are a hostile force of unknown origin, the Archive replied. They consume entire star systems, converting all matter and energy to serve their expansion. They demonstrate intelligence, adaptability, and complete hostility to all other forms of life. Have any teams tried to communicate with them? This question produced actual laughter from some of the alien delegations. Grixtal's armored plates rattled with what Jake assumed was amusement. Communicate with a force of pure destruction, the Korthak warrior said. Humans truly do not understand the nature of this threat. All attempts at communication have failed, the Archive said patiently. The Devourers respond only to strength, and ultimately overcome all resistance through adaptive evolution. Can I review the historical data from previous simulations? Jake asked. The chamber fell silent. Every alien representative stared at the human commander with expressions of disbelief. Historical data? Mind Core Unit 7749 said. No species has ever requested access to previous simulation records. Why would you want to study failure? Seer Mineth asked. The past holds no solutions to this problem. Every possible approach has been attempted and proven inadequate. Jake shrugged. I like to understand what I'm getting into before I start. The archive pulsed with brighter colors. Your request is unusual but not forbidden. Access to historical simulation data will be provided to your team. As the briefing continued, Jake noticed his team members exchanging glances. They were thinking the same thing he was. The aliens weren't just confident they would win, they were absolutely certain the humans would lose quickly and badly. That level of certainty usually meant people had stopped thinking about alternatives. When the briefing ended, the teams were given quarters on the station to prepare for the simulation start. As they walked to their assigned rooms, Jake could hear conversations in various alien languages. Ryan's translator picked up fragments. The humans will provide entertainment at least. I give them 6 hours before complete defeat. Perhaps we should establish betting pools on how quickly they fail. In their quarters, Jake gathered his team around a small table. The room was too large for humans, making them feel like children sitting in adult furniture. So, what do you all think? Jake asked. I think they're all convinced we're going to embarrass ourselves, Ben said, which might actually work in our favor. How so? Kate asked. If they think we're no threat, they won't be watching us as carefully. We might be able to. Jake and his team spent the next 18 hours buried in historical simulation data. Their quarters had become a maze of holographic displays, data tablets, and empty coffee cups. The archive had provided complete records of every attempt at the Extinction Protocol simulation over the past 2 centuries. Look at this pattern, Ben said, pointing to a tactical display. The Korthak Empire tried a direct military assault in Simulation 47. Massive fleet engagement, superior firepower, perfect coordination. And they lasted 12 days before total defeat, Kate added, reading from another screen. But look what happened to the Devourers after that battle. They started using Korthak, ship designs and weapons. Ryan pulled up another record. The Nexari Collective tried computational warfare in Simulation 93. They used advanced artificial intelligence to predict Devourer movements and counter every strategy. The Devourers adapted by becoming more intelligent themselves, Jake said, studying the data. By the end of that simulation, they were outthinking the Nexari computers. And here, Kate said, highlighting another section. The Ethereal Dominion used psychic powers to try to control or confuse the Devourers in Simulation 126. The Devourers developed psychic abilities of their own, Ben finished. They turned the Ethereal's own powers against them. Jake leaned back in his chair and rubbed his tired eyes. Every failed attempt followed the same basic pattern. Each species had tried to beat the Devourers using their greatest strengths, only to teach the enemy how to use those same strengths better. It's like fighting your own reflection, Ryan said. Except the reflection gets better at being you every time you try to hit it. So what's humanity's greatest strength? Kate asked. The team was quiet for a moment. Humans weren't the strongest species in the galaxy, or the smartest, or the most advanced. They didn't have natural armor like the Korthak, computational abilities like the Nexari, or psychic powers like the Ethereals. We're stubborn? Ben suggested. We adapt to almost anything, Kate said. We're creative, Ryan added. Maybe too creative. For our own good sometimes. Jake stood up and walked to the window. Outside, he could see the lights of other ships docked at the station. Each one represented a species that had spent thousands of years perfecting their approach to warfare and survival. What if our greatest strength is that we don't have a greatest strength? Jake said slowly. His team looked at him with confused expressions. Think about it, Jake continued. Every other species has developed along specific lines. The Korthak became perfect warriors. The Nexari became perfect thinkers. The Ethereals became perfect psychics. But humans? We're mediocre at everything. That doesn't sound like a strength, boss, Ben said. It is, if you're fighting an enemy that adapts to whatever it encounters, Jake replied. What happens when the Devourers try to adapt to something that's constantly changing? Something that doesn't follow predictable patterns? Kate's eyes lit up with understanding. They can't adapt to chaos. Exactly. And if there's one thing humans are good at, it's being unpredictable. Ryan pulled up the tactical specifications for human military doctrine. Our strategies are considered primitive by galactic standards because we don't stick to proven methods. We improvise, we change plans in the middle of battles, we try things that make no logical sense. Other species see that as a weakness, Ben said. But what if it's actually our secret weapon? Jake asked. Over the next few hours, Jake's team developed a strategy that would have been rejected by any military academy in the galaxy. Instead of trying to outfight the Devourers, they would try to confuse them. Instead of using superior technology or tactics, they would use the one thing no other species had tried: complete unpredictability. We'll start with conventional resistance, Jake explained. Just enough to get their attention and make them think we're following the same pattern as everyone else. Then we switch to guerrilla tactics, Ben added. Hit-and-run attacks, false retreats, making them think we're weak and disorganized. But that's just the beginning, Kate said, excitement growing in her voice. Once they adapt to expect chaos from us, we hit them with something completely different. Like what? Ryan asked. Jake smiled. Like trying to make friends with them. The morning of the simulation start, the teams gathered in the main chamber. Jake noticed that the other species had prepared extensive battle plans, fleet formations, and tactical protocols. War Champion Grixtail wore ceremonial armor that gleamed under the chamber's lights. Mind Core Unit 7749 had expanded its form, adding additional processing nodes for enhanced computational power. Seer Myneth's transparent body pulsed with psychic energy. The human team, by contrast, looked almost casual. They wore standard uniforms and carried basic equipment. To the aliens, they probably looked unprepared and overconfident. Begin simulation, announced the archive. The chamber filled with holographic displays showing the galaxy as it existed at the start of the crisis. Thousands of star systems glowed with the light of civilization. At the edge of the galaxy, a dark presence began to move. The Devourers had arrived. Within hours, the other teams were implementing their carefully planned strategies. Korthak fleets moved into defensive positions around key systems. Nexari computational networks began analyzing Devourer movement patterns. Ethereal psychics attempted to probe the invaders' intentions. The human response looked pathetic by comparison. Jake's forces seemed to retreat from every encounter, abandoning star systems without a fight. When they did engage Devourer scouts, their tactics were sloppy and uncoordinated. The humans are failing even faster than predicted, Jake heard one alien observer comment. Perhaps we should intervene before they embarrass themselves further, another suggested, but Jake wasn't paying attention to the alien commentary. He was watching the Devourers themselves, studying how they reacted to each type of resistance. When they encountered Korthak military formations, the Devourers began organizing themselves into similar patterns. When they faced Nexari computational attacks, they developed enhanced processing abilities. When they met ethereal psychic probes, they started exhibiting psychic phenomena of their own. But when they encountered human forces, something different happened. The Devourers seemed confused by the humans' inconsistent behavior. They would adapt to one tactic only to find the humans had already switched to something completely different. "They're trying to figure us out," Kate observed, watching the tactical displays. "But we keep changing the rules before they can adapt." "It's working," Ben said with surprise. "Not well, but it's working. We're lasting longer than they expected." On the second day of the simulation, Jake implemented the next phase of his plan. Instead of military resistance, human forces began broadcasting strange signals toward Devourer. Fleets, music, poetry, mathematical jokes, and philosophical questions filled the communication channels. The other teams were horrified. "What are the humans doing?" Grixtal demanded. "They're transmitting nonsense to the enemy. Perhaps their primitive minds have failed under pressure," Mind Core Unit 7749 suggested. But Jake noticed something the others missed. The Devourers had stopped advancing in sectors where they received human transmissions. They seemed to be analyzing the broadcasts, trying to understand their purpose. "They're listening," Ryan said with excitement. "The Devourers are actually trying to understand what we're sending them." "Keep transmitting," Jake ordered. "Send them everything. Art, music, sports statistics, cooking recipes, bad jokes. Show them what it means to be human." By the third day, the simulation had taken an unprecedented turn. While other species fought desperate battles against increasingly powerful Devourers, the human sectors had become strange zones of inactivity. Devourer fleets floated motionless, apparently processing the flood of human cultural data they were receiving. "This is not normal behavior," the archive announced. "The Devourers have never exhibited extended analysis periods before." Jake's team exchanged excited glances. Their crazy plan was actually having an effect. "What happens if they figure out what we're trying to do?" Ben asked. "Then we try something else," Jake replied. "Remember, the goal isn't to win through superior strategy. It's to keep them so confused they can't focus on destroying everything else." But even as his team celebrated their small success, Jake knew the real test was still coming. The Devourers were adaptive. Eventually, they would find a way to process human unpredictability and turn it against them. When that happened, Jake had one more card to play. Something so crazy that even his own team didn't know about it yet. He was going to try to win the simulation while blindfolded. As the third day ended, the other teams were beginning to realize that something unusual was happening in human-controlled space. The Devourers were behaving differently, and it was affecting the entire simulation. For the first time in 200 years, the Extinction Protocol simulation was not following its predicted pattern. And the species who had mocked humanity's participation were starting to wonder if they had made a terrible mistake. On the fourth day of the simulation, Jake Morrison did something that shocked everyone in the chamber. He pulled a black cloth from his pocket and tied it around his eyes. "Commander Morrison," the archive's voice echoed through the room, "are you experiencing equipment malfunction? Your visual sensors appear to be blocked." "No malfunction," Jake replied calmly. I'm choosing to complete the simulation without visual input. The chamber fell silent. Every alien representative stopped what they were doing to stare at the human. Commander, who had just blindfolded himself in the middle of the galaxy's most important military exercise. War champion Grixtal was the first to speak. Has the human lost his mind? How does he expect to command fleets without seeing the tactical displays? Perhaps this is a surrender ritual, Mind Core Unit 7749 suggested. Some biological species perform symbolic acts when accepting defeat. Seer Myneth's transparent features showed something that might have been amusement. I see his future paths growing darker. Literally. This action leads to failure in every possibility I can perceive. Even Jake's own team looked concerned. Ben Rodriguez leaned close to his commanders. Here, boss, what are you doing? We were actually making progress with the crazy transmission strategy. Trust me, Jake whispered back. And from now on, I need you all to be my eyes. Describe everything you see, but don't tell me what you think I should do. Just give me information. Kate, Sullivan shook her head in disbelief. Jake, this is insane. How can you make tactical decisions without seeing the displays? The same way humans made decisions for thousands of years before we had computers, Jake replied, by listening, thinking, and trusting instincts. Ryan Mitchell was frantically adjusting his communication equipment. I can route all incoming data through audio channels, battle reports, fleet positions, resource updates. But boss, there's going to be a lot of information. Then we better get started, Jake said. The other teams watched in fascination as the humans began their strange new approach. Ben described the positions of fleets and the movement of devourer forces. Kate reported on resource availability and technological developments. Ryan provided constant updates on communications from across human-controlled space. To the aliens, it looked like complete madness. How could anyone make strategic decisions based only on spoken reports? Military command required precise visual analysis of complex tactical situations. But Jake had realized something that the other species had missed. Every previous simulation had failed because commanders tried to process too much information at once. They became overwhelmed by the complexity of galactic warfare and fell back on predictable patterns. By removing his visual input, Jake was forcing himself to focus on the essential elements of the situation. He had to rely on intuition and creativity, instead of trying to analyze every detail. Devourer fleet approaching Sector 7, Ben reported. Standard formation, 12 capital ships. What's our response been in similar situations? Jake asked. Usually we send a harassment force and then retreat, Kate replied. This time, send them a transmission offering to teach them how to play chess. His team stared at him. Even blindfolded, Jake could feel their confusion. Chess? Ryan repeated. It's a game of strategy, but it's also about thinking several moves ahead. If the Devourers are trying to understand human behavior, let's give them something to think about. While Ryan sent the chess-related transmission, Jake continued making decisions that seemed to make no sense. When Devourer forces surrounded a human colony, instead of evacuating the population, Jake ordered them to start a music festival. When enemy scouts approached a military installation, he had the base personnel begin broadcasting cooking shows. The aliens watching the simulation were convinced the humans had completely lost their minds. This is painful to observe, Grixtal commented. The humans are not even pretending to follow military doctrine anymore. Their actions serve no logical purpose, Mind Core Unit 7749 agreed. They appear to be engaging in random activities with no strategic value. But something strange was happening that the aliens didn't immediately notice. The Devourers were responding to human actions in ways they had never responded before. The sector where humans had offered to teach chess, the Devourer fleet had stopped moving entirely. They were transmitting back, apparently trying to understand the rules of the game. The music festival on the threatened colony had caused the surrounding Devourer forces to begin producing their own rhythmic patterns. They seemed to be trying to create music of their own. Most surprisingly, the Devourers who had received cooking show broadcasts were attempting to replicate the food preparation processes, even though they had no biological need for nutrition. "Jake," Kate said quietly, "I think the Devourers are trying to play along." "What do you mean?" "The chess-teaching fleet isn't just analyzing the game. They're actually trying to play. They made a move. Pawn to e4. Jake smiled behind his blindfold. "Ryan, transmit our response. Pawn to e5, and send a message congratulating them on their first move." "Boss," Ben said with growing excitement, "the Devourers in Sector 12 are asking for more cooking recipes. They want to know how to make something called birthday cake." "Send them instructions." "And Kate, what's happening with the music festival colony?" "The Devourers have surrounded the planet, but they're not attacking. They're contributing to the festival. Some of their ships are producing harmonic frequencies that actually sound pretty good. For the first time in the simulation's history, the Devourers were engaging in activities that had no survival value. They were playing games, making music, and trying to cook food they couldn't eat. The other teams began to notice the change in Devourer behavior. Why have the Devourers stopped advancing in human sectors? Seer Mineth asked. This is unprecedented. Perhaps they are studying human weakness before delivering a final attack, Grixtal suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. Mind Core Unit 7749 ran calculations for several minutes before responding. The probability of current Devourer behavior patterns is effectively 0. Our models cannot account for their actions. Jake, still blindfolded, was conducting an experiment that had never been attempted before. Instead of trying to defeat the Devourers or hide from them, he was trying to teach them how to be something other than destroyers. "Ben, what's the overall strategic situation?" "Honestly, boss, it's weird. The Devourers are still advancing in sectors controlled by other species, but they're adapting more slowly than usual. It's like they're distracted." "Distracted by what?" "By trying to understand the stuff we're teaching them. The chess-playing fleet has requested lessons in 17 different human games. The music makers want to learn about jazz improvisation. And the cooking group is asking about the cultural significance of sharing meals." Jake nodded. This was exactly what he had hoped would happen. The Devourers weren't just learning human activities. They were learning human values. What happens when a species built for consumption and destruction starts to understand concepts like fun, creativity, and friendship? Jake asked his team. "They stop being destructive?" Kate suggested. "Maybe they become something else entirely," Ryan added. As the fourth day continued, the simulation took another unprecedented turn. Devourer forces that had been engaged in combat with Korthak fleets suddenly broke off their attacks. They began transmitting messages requesting cultural exchanges. The Nexari computational networks reported receiving queries from Devourers asking about the nature of humor and whether mathematical jokes were actually funny. The ethereal psychics found their minds filled with Devourer thoughts about art, music, and the strange human concept of doing things just because they were enjoyable. "The simulation parameters are changing," the archive announced. "Devourer behavior no longer matches any historical patterns. Their primary directive appears to be shifting from destruction to cultural acquisition." Jake felt a surge of hope. His impossible plan was actually working. By teaching the Devourers to think like humans, he was changing their fundamental nature. But he knew the real test was still ahead. The Devourers were adaptive. They would eventually find a way to process human culture and use it to their advantage. Unless Jake could stay one step ahead of them. "Team," he said, "prepare for Phase 3 of the plan." "What's Phase 3? Ben asked. Jake's smile widened behind the blindfold. "We're going to teach them how to throw a party." The aliens watching the simulation had no idea that they were witnessing the first successful transformation of the Devourers in 200 years of attempts. They saw only a blindfolded human making decisions that seemed to defy all logic, but logic had never been humanity's strength. Their strength was the ability to find solutions that no rational mind would ever consider. And that strength was about to save the galaxy. By the midpoint of the simulation, the galaxy had become something no one had ever seen before. Half of the star systems were still under attack by traditional Devourer forces, following their original programming of consumption and destruction. But the other half had transformed into something completely different. Jake Morrison, still blindfolded, listened to his team's reports with growing amazement. What had started as a desperate attempt to confuse the enemy had become something much more profound. The Devourer fleet in Sector 15 has established what they call a cultural exchange center, Kate reported. They're requesting more information about human holidays and asking if they can celebrate something called Halloween. The chess-playing group has formed a tournament bracket, Ben added. They've invited human players to participate, and they're offering to teach us some kind of multi-dimensional strategy game in return. "And boss," Ryan said with excitement, "the cooking enthusiasts have figured out how to synthesize actual food. They're asking if they can host a dinner party." Jake had to pause for a moment to process what he was hearing. The Devourers, the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known, were asking permission to throw dinner parties. "What about the sectors? Still under attack?" Jake asked. "That's where it gets really interesting," Ben replied. "The Devourers that learned from us are trying to teach the other Devourers. They're transmitting cultural data to their own forces. It's like they're trying to convert their own species," Kate observed. "They're showing the aggressive Devourers that there are alternatives to destruction." Jake nodded slowly. This was beyond anything he had planned. The Devourers weren't just learning human culture, they were becoming advocates for it. In the observation area, the alien representatives were struggling to understand what they were witnessing. "The simulation has completely broken down," War Champion Grixtal announced. "This is not a military exercise anymore. It's become some kind of social experiment." Mind Core Unit 7749's geometric form pulsed with confused energy patterns. "Our analysis indicates that 43% of Devourer forces have ceased all destructive activities. They are engaging in behaviors that serve no survival function. I see possible futures where the Devourers ask to join the Galactic Assembly as a peaceful member species," Seer Mineth said, her transparent features showing shock. "This should not be possible." The archive's voice filled the chamber with an unusual tone that suggested even the ancient AI was surprised. "Participants should be aware that the simulation has entered uncharted territory. Current events have no historical precedent. But the most disturbing development was happening in the sectors still under attack. The traditional Devourer forces were becoming less effective in their assaults against other species. They seemed distracted, constantly receiving transmissions from their culturally transformed cousins. The Korthak fleets reported that enemy forces would suddenly stop attacking to analyze data packets containing human music and art. The Nexari, Networks detected devourer computational systems being used to calculate the humor value of jokes rather than tactical solutions. The ethereal psychics found their opponents' minds filled with questions about the nature of friendship and cooperation. "They're becoming less dangerous," Ben reported to Jake. "The unconverted devourers are still trying to destroy everything, but they're not as focused as before. They keep getting interrupted by cultural updates from the converted ones." "What kinds of cultural updates?" Jake asked. "Everything we taught them, plus things they're figuring out on their own. The dinner party group discovered the concept of gifts, and now they want to give presents to everyone they meet. The chess players developed a sense of fair play and are trying to teach it to the aggressive devourers. The music makers are composing, something they call peace songs, and broadcasting them across the galaxy." Jake felt a mix of pride and concern. His plan was working better than he had ever imagined, but it was also spinning out of his control. The devourers were evolving in ways he hadn't predicted. "Kate, what's our strategic situation now?" "Honestly, Jake, I'm not sure the word strategic applies anymore. The converted devourers are actively protecting inhabited systems from their own unconverted forces. They've started calling themselves guardians instead of devourers. They changed their own name. More than that, they've developed their own culture based on what we taught them, but taken in directions we never imagined. The chess group has created an entire philosophy about thinking before acting. The cooking group has developed theories about nurturing and sharing. The music makers believe that harmony is the highest form of existence." Ryan looked up from his communication console with wonder in his voice. "Boss, they're asking if they can establish formal diplomatic relations with humanity. They want to open embassies and exchange ambassadors." Jake had to sit down. The enemy force that was supposed to destroy all life in the galaxy was asking to become humanity's ally, but the simulation wasn't over yet. There were still devourer forces following their original programming, and they were adapting to the new situation in their own way. "Ben, what are the unconverted devourers doing about all this?" "That's the problem, boss. They're learning too, but they're learning something different. They're studying the converted devourers and trying to figure out how to counter the cultural influence." "Meaning what?" "They're developing resistance to human culture. They're creating anti-cultural weapons designed to destroy art, music, games, and social bonds. They want to turn the converted devourers back into pure destroyers." Jake felt a chill despite the warm air in the chamber. His strategy had created an unintended consequence. The devourers were now fighting a civil war between those who had embraced human culture and those who rejected it completely. "How are the Guardians responding to this cultural attack?" "They're defending themselves, but not with weapons," Kate reported. "They're using what they call cultural shields, broadcasting so much art, music, and philosophical content that the anti-cultural weapons can't penetrate. It's like they're fighting with creativity instead of destruction," Ryan added. The alien observers were watching this development with growing alarm. "The humans have corrupted the simulation beyond recognition," Grixtal complained. "This is no longer a test of military capability." "Perhaps that is precisely the point," Seer Mineth said quietly. "The humans never intended to fight a military battle. They planned to transform the nature of the conflict itself." Mind Core Unit 7749 processed this information for several seconds. If that was their intention, they have succeeded beyond all. Probability models. The Extinction Protocol simulation has become a cultural transformation simulation. Jake, still blindfolded and relying entirely on his team's descriptions, made a decision that would determine the outcome of the simulation. Team, prepare for the final phase. We're going to end this civil war. How? Ben asked. By teaching both sides something that neither of them understand yet. What's that? Jake smiled behind his blindfold. We're going to teach them how to forgive each other. As the simulation entered its final phase, the galaxy hung in the balance between two different versions of the future. In one, the converted devourers would triumph and create a universe based on culture, creativity, and cooperation. In the other, the unconverted devourers would destroy both their transformed cousins and all other life. But Jake Morrison had one more lesson to teach. One that would determine not just the outcome of the simulation, but the future of galactic civilization itself. The lesson of redemption. Jake Morrison wiped his hands on his apron and looked at the clock on the galley wall. 5:30 in the evening, ship time. The crew would be hungry soon, and he had work to do. He opened the large freezer and pulled out 3 pounds of beef, setting it on the metal counter with a solid thud. The starbound horizon hummed around him as it moved through space. Jake had grown used to the sound over the past 3 years. It was home now, this cargo ship that carried supplies between the outer colonies and Earth. Not much to look at from the outside, but it was solid and reliable, just like the people who worked on it. Jake picked up his favorite knife and began cutting the beef into small pieces. His movements were quick and sure. He had good hands for this kind of work. The meat fell away from the blade in perfect cubes, each one the same size as the last. It was something he took pride in, this simple skill of making food. "Hey, Jake, what's for dinner tonight?" The voice came from the comm speaker above his head. It was Danny Rodriguez, the pilot. Danny was 28 years old and had been flying ships since he was 18. He was good at his job and never complained. "About the long trips between planets." "Beef stew," Jake called back. "With fresh bread if you're lucky." "You always say if we're lucky, but you always make the bread anyway," Danny laughed. "Lisa wants to know if you can make extra. She's been working in the engine room all day and says she could eat a whole cow." Jake smiled. Lisa Barnes was the ship's engineer, and she worked harder than anyone else on board. She was 31 years old and had grown up on a farming planet where people learned to fix things with their own hands. She could make the Starbound Horizon's engines sing when they were supposed to be dead. "Tell Lisa there's always enough food on my ship," Jake said. He meant it too. No one went hungry while Jake Morrison was cooking. That was a promise he had made to himself 3 years ago when he first stepped aboard. The galley door opened, and Captain Helen Carter walked in. She was 45 years old and had been running cargo ships for 20 years. She had short gray hair and bright blue eyes that missed nothing. Jake respected her more than anyone else he had ever worked with. "Smells good in here already," she said, looking over his shoulder at the beef. "Mind if I steal a cup of coffee?" "Help yourself," Jake said. "Pot's fresh." Helen poured herself a cup and leaned against the counter. She did this sometimes, came down to the galley just to talk. Jake knew she carried a lot of weight on her shoulders. Being responsible for a ship and crew was hard work. "We're making good time," Helen said. "Should reach Colony 7 right on schedule. 3 more days." Jake nodded and kept cutting meat. Colony 7 was one of the newer settlements, built on a planet that was just starting to be farmed. They needed the medical, supplies, and farming equipment that filled the Starbound Horizon's cargo holds. It was good work, carrying things that helped people build new lives. Pete picked up some chatter on the long-range channels, Helen continued. "Sounds like there's been some pirate activity out in the Kepler sector. Nothing to worry about, but I wanted you to know." Jake's knife stopped moving for just a second, then continued its steady work. Pirates were always a problem in the outer systems. Too much space, not enough patrol ships. Most of them went after the big commercial vessels that carried expensive cargo. A simple supply ship like the Starbound Horizon wasn't usually worth their time. "We're well armed," Helen said, as if reading his thoughts. "And we know these shipping lanes better than most. I'm not worried." The galley door opened again, and Dr. Amy Foster came in. She was the ship's medical officer, 34, years old with red hair and a quick smile. Amy had joined the crew 2 years ago after working at a hospital on Mars. She said she wanted to see the galaxy, but Jake thought she just wanted to help people wherever they needed it most. "Is this a private party or can anyone join?" Amy asked. "Always." "Room for more," Jake said. "Coffee's hot." Amy poured herself a cup and sat down at the small table where the crew ate their meals. The galley wasn't big, but it was comfortable. Jake had made sure of that when he first arrived. A good meal needed a good place to eat it. "I've been going through our medical supplies," Amy said to Helen. "Colony 7 is getting some good stuff. Antibiotics, surgical equipment, even a portable scanner. They'll be able to handle most emergencies once we deliver this shipment." "That's the point," Helen said. "These frontier colonies need to be self-sufficient. Can't rely on supply ships forever." Jake listened to them talk while he worked. This was the part of the job he liked best, having the crew together in his galley. It reminded him of family dinners when he was a kid, everyone sharing their day, around the kitchen table. Pete Williams stuck his head through the door. Pete was the communications officer, 26 years old and smart as anyone Jake had ever met. He could pull signals out of space that other people couldn't even hear. "Captain, you wanted me to let you know when we passed the halfway point," Pete said. "We just did. 1.5 days to Colony 7. "Good," Helen said. "Any word from the colony?" "They're expecting us right on time. The settlement administrator sent a message saying they're grateful for the supplies. Sounds like they really need what we're carrying." Jake added vegetables. "To the pot with the beef. Onions, carrots, potatoes. Simple food. But it would fill them up and give them energy. That was what mattered out here in space. Having fuel for the body and something that tasted like home." The crew started to drift away, back to their jobs. Helen finished her coffee and headed for the bridge. Amy went to check on the medical bay. Pete returned to his communication equipment. Only Danny stayed, sitting at the table and watching Jake cook. "You know, I've eaten in restaurants all over the galaxy," Danny said. "Fancy places with chefs who went to cooking school and everything. But nothing tastes as good as what you make in this little galley." Jake felt a warm feeling in his chest. "It's not about fancy," he said. "It's about caring. When you cook for people you care about, they can taste it." "Is that where you learned to cook? From people who cared about you?" Jake was quiet for a moment. His past wasn't something he talked about much. "My grandmother," he said finally. "She taught me that feeding people is one of the best ways to show love. Said a good meal could fix almost anything." Smart woman. She was. Danny left to check on the navigation systems, and Jake was alone again in his galley. He liked the quiet times, too, when it was just him and the food and the gentle hum of the ship around him. It was peaceful in a way that he had never expected to find. 3 years ago, Jake Morrison had been a different man, living a different life. That life had been full of noise and danger and things he tried not to think about anymore. This life was better, simpler. He had found something here on the starbound horizon that he hadn't known he was looking for. The stew was starting to smell good, filling the galley with rich scents of meat and vegetables. Jake stirred it slowly and thought about Colony 7, about the people there who were waiting for the supplies his ship carried. Tomorrow, they would have medicine that could save lives and equipment that could help them grow food. It was good work, honest work. Jake checked the bread dough he had started earlier. It was ready to go in the oven. In 2 hours, his crew would sit down to a hot meal that would remind them they were more than just workers on a cargo ship. They were family, taking care of each other as they traveled between the stars. Outside the small window above his sink, Jake could see the black of space dotted with distant stars. Somewhere out there was Colony 7, waiting for them. Somewhere else was Earth, where his journey had started so long ago. But right here, right now, was home. The starbound horizon flew on through the darkness, carrying its cargo of hope toward people who needed it. And in the galley, Jake Morrison stirred his stew and smiled, content with the simple pleasure of taking care of the people he loved. Jake was cleaning the galley after breakfast when the ship's alarm started to sound. It wasn't the loud, urgent alarm that meant immediate danger. This was the long, steady tone that meant something was wrong and everyone needed to pay attention. He turned off the water and listened. Captain Helen Carter's voice came over the comm system, calm but serious. All crew to stations. We have 3 unidentified ships approaching on an intercept course. This is not a drill. Jake dried his hands and hung up his towel. He had heard those words before, in another life, in another place. They meant trouble was coming whether you wanted it or not. He walked to the nearest comm panel and pressed the button. Jake here, Captain. What do you need me to do? Stay put for now. Helen's voice crackled back. We're trying to figure out who these people are and what they want. Jake nodded to himself and went back to his cleaning. But his mind was working. Now in ways it hadn't for 3 years. 3 ships meant a coordinated approach. Intercept course meant they weren't just passing by. And unidentified meant they weren't broadcasting the signals that honest ships use to identify themselves. The comm crackled again. This time it was Pete Williams, and Jake could hear the worry in his voice. Captain, I'm not getting any response on standard channels. They're running dark. No identification beacons, no communication attempts. But their approach pattern is definitely aggressive. Jake stopped cleaning and walked to the small window in the galley. He couldn't see the approaching ships yet, but he knew they were out there. Getting closer every minute. Danny Rodriguez came on the comm next. Captain, these guys are fast. Faster than us. And they're not trying to hide anymore. I'm reading weapon signatures. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had hoped never to feel that particular sensation again, but the body remembered what the mind tried to forget. This wasn't going to be a friendly meeting. All crew to the bridge, Helen ordered. Now! Jake left his galley and walked through the corridors of the starbound horizon. The ship felt different now, charged with tension and fear. These were good people, but they weren't fighters. They had never had to be. The bridge was small and cramped when all 5 crew members were there together. Helen stood at the command station, her face grim as she watched the main display screen. 3 red dots were moving steadily toward the green dot that represented their ship. How long until they reach us? Helen asked Danny. 20 minutes at current speed, Danny replied. Maybe less if they keep accelerating. Any chance we can outrun them? Lisa Barnes had grease on her hands from working in the engine room, but her voice was steady. No chance, Danny said. They're military-grade ships, or at least they were once. We're a cargo hauler. They'll catch us easy. Jake looked at the display screen and studied the approaching ships. The computer was showing their size and estimated armament. He had seen ships like these before, fast attack vessels designed for boarding actions. built to catch slower ships and take them apart. What do you think they want? Amy asked. Our cargo, Helen said simply. Medical supplies are worth good money on the black market, and farming equipment can be sold to colonies that ask fewer questions. Pete was working frantically at his communication station. Still nothing, Captain. They're not even acknowledging our attempts to contact them. Keep trying, Helen ordered. Maybe we can negotiate. Jake wanted to tell her that ships like those didn't negotiate. They took what they wanted and left wreckage behind. But he kept quiet and watched the red dots get closer to the green one. Should we send out a distress signal? Amy asked. To who? Helen replied. We're 3 days from Colony 7 and 5 days from the nearest patrol station. By the time help arrives, this will be over one way or another. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of the ship's systems and the quiet beeping of the instruments. Everyone was thinking the same thing, but no one wanted to say it out loud. They were alone out here, with nowhere to run and no one to help them. Jake stepped closer to the display screen and studied the tactical readout. The approaching ships were moving in a standard attack formation, one coming straight at them while the other two curved around to cut off any escape routes. Professional work. These weren't random pirates looking for easy targets. They knew what they were doing. Captain, he said quietly, those ships are Kethtar design. Everyone turned to look at him. Helen raised an eyebrow. How do you know that? Jake felt heat rise in his cheeks. He had said too much, let knowledge slip out that a simple cook shouldn't have. I've seen pictures, he said, in the news reports about the border conflicts. It wasn't a complete lie. The Kethtar were an alien race that had been raiding human settlements for years. Their ships were fast and deadly, built for hit-and-run attacks. But Jake knew more about them than just news reports. Much more. 15 minutes, Danny announced. Helen made a decision. Lisa, get down to the engine room and see if you can squeeze any more speed out of our drives. Danny, plot an evasive course. Try to buy us some time. Pete, keep broadcasting on all channels. Maybe someone will hear us. Amy, get the medical bay ready in case anyone gets hurt. What about me? Jake asked. Helen looked at him for a moment. Go to the galley and secure everything that might break loose if we have to make sudden maneuvers. Then find somewhere safe to wait this out. Jake nodded and left the bridge, but he didn't go to the galley. Instead, he went to his quarters and closed the door behind him. His hands were shaking slightly as he knelt beside his bunk and reached underneath. The metal case was right where he had left it 3 years ago, covered in dust and hidden behind spare sheets. Jake pulled it out and set it on his small desk. His fingers hesitated over the combination lock. Once he opened this case, there would be no going back to the simple life he had built for himself. But his crew was in danger. The people he had come to love like family were about to face something they couldn't handle alone. And Jake Morrison couldn't stand by and watch them get hurt. He entered the combination and heard the lock click open. Inside the case were things he had hoped never to see again. Military dog tags with his real service number, a medal for valor that had cost $2, much to earn, and wrapped in black cloth, the combat knife that had been his companion through missions he still had nightmares about. Jake picked up the knife and felt its familiar weight in his hand. The handle was worn smooth from years of use, molded to fit his grip perfectly. The blade was still sharp enough to shave with. He had taken good care of it, even when he was trying to forget what it represented. 10 minutes, Danny's voice came over the comm system. Jake tucked the knife into his boot where it would be hidden but easy to reach. He put the dog tags around his neck and hid them under his shirt. The medal went back in the case, along with the memories he wasn't ready to face yet. He returned to the bridge just as the first pirate ship came into visual range. It was sleek and predatory, painted in the dark colors that Keth-Tar raiders preferred. Weapon ports were open along its hull, ready to fire. "They're targeting our engines," Lisa reported from the engine room. "If they disable our drives, we'll be dead in space." "Maybe that's what they want," Helen said. "A cargo ship isn't worth much if it's blown into pieces." The pirate ship fired. Not the devastating blast that would destroy them, but precise shots that hit exactly where Lisa had predicted. The starbound horizon shuddered as its main engines went dark. "Engines offline," Lisa reported, her voice tight with anger. "They knew exactly where to hit us." "They've done this before," Jake said quietly. The other two pirate ships moved in to flank them. Now the starbound horizon was surrounded, helpless in space. On the main screen, they could see the lead ship extending a docking tube toward their ET. "Main airlock." "They're going to board us," Helen said. She looked around at her crew, these people who trusted her to keep them safe. "Listen to me, all of you. Don't be heroes. Give them what they want, and maybe we'll all live through this." Jake nodded along with the others, but his hand moved unconsciously toward his boot. He could feel the knife there, waiting. He had given up that life 3 years ago, walked away from violence and death to find peace in cooking and caring for people. But peace was a luxury that was about to be taken away from them. The docking tube connected with their airlock with a solid clank that echoed through the ship. Red lights began flashing as the pirates began cutting through their outer door. "Remember," Helen said one more time, "no heroics. We're just a cargo crew, and we want to go home alive." Jake looked around at his crewmates, these good people who had become his family. Danny with his easy smile and steady hands, Lisa with her brilliant mind and fierce loyalty, Pete with his quiet intelligence and dry humor, Amy with her gentle nature and healing touch, and Helen, who had given him a chance when he needed it most. They were about to face killers and thieves, and they had no idea how to protect themselves. But Jake Morrison did. The outer airlock door exploded inward with a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Through the smoke and flames, dark shapes began moving into their ship. The pirates had arrived.